Hello, everyone. I'm here for one of my stories. This is Lindsay Dunn, and today I'm here with no one else but myself. I wanted to record this episode on the character of Mike Barnes. He is the most hotly anticipated character that will be coming to Cobra Kai season 5, the newest season dropping September 9th, and sort of give you a cheat guide to Mike Barnes so you can be thinking about his character coming in and what will be possible. I think we can all agree that what the big three does so well for this series is they take the characters from the movies and they bring them in to the Cobra Kai world and flesh them out and make them just great characters. And so how do they do that? They take the source material of the movies and they are so good at picking out these things that, little lines, little scenes, jokes from the series, and they turn them into these fully fleshed plot points, which are brilliant. So if they're bringing Mark Barnes in, you can assume that where will they get the material for his character? They are going to base it on his role and his stuff that happened to him in the Karate Kid movie. So let's talk about that. So one of the things that I think is the most interesting thing about his character, he's brought in to be sort of a fall guy for Terry Silver and Kreese and what they want to do to Miyagi and Daniel. And before we get too much into like the details of what happened, I think it's really interesting to take a step back from that and think about why did they have to bring in Mike Barnes in the first place? Let's think about it. Now, John Kreese is supposedly this successful dojo owner. He lost all of his students after the first Karate Kid, all the Cobra Kai, I guess, after he almost tried to kill Johnny or suffocate him. All of the main Cobras that we know, I guess, quit the dojo. But you're like, okay, well, did he lose all of his students? Could he have called any of them up? No, but even then, we've got Terry Silver, who seems to be the best connected, villain this series has ever seen. He's got friends in low places. He seems to know all the politicians. And so when you think about it, why did they bring in Mike Barnes to do this? Did Terry Silver not know any other teams that that would come and do this job? Why did they pay in an outside contractor to do this? Because that's basically what Mike Barnes is. He is a contractor. He is a hired help. If you take a step back and look at it, what he is being asked to do is really unpleasant. If you think about the way that Terry Silver operates, he does not like to get his hands dirty. He looks for other people to do his dirty work for him. So a great example of this is in the dance club. In Karate Kid Part 3, Daniel and Jessica go to this dance club, and Terry Silver is there, and he finds a erratic drunk person that's there and says, basically he pays him to start a fight with Daniel. And so even though that scene only lasted a few seconds, it's a great example of what Terry does. He never wants to get his hands dirty. He uses his money to bring people in, and get these people ingratiated to him, and then he can turn around and say, not me. Same as with we did with Daniel. When he brought Daniel in, he made him grateful. He got Daniel to the point where even as Daniel was feeling really awkward about what was going on and thinking, this is not what Mr. Miyagi would want me to do. He wouldn't want me to be training with the techniques that Terry Silver was having him do. It's the opposite. Miyagi taught defense only, and Terry Silver is teaching him how to make people, punch them in the face so hard that they cry blood. So Daniel knew this wasn't right, but yet he would, every time he would do this training, Daniel would just be like, thank you so much. I really appreciate everything. So he was grateful for this abuse, basically. And so with Mike Barnes, he was brought into this as a hired person. It wasn't going to be a person that Terry wanted good things for, because he had Snake and Dennis, and supposedly when he brings in Mike, he says that Dennis will handle your training and Snake handles everything else. So supposedly if Dennis is training him, Dennis must be a pretty good fighter. So why aren't they going to have Dennis do this? They needed somebody to be the fall guy and somebody to do the dirty work. It wasn't going to be a pleasant job. You realize that perhaps even though Mike Barnes comes across as this complete psychopath, he in some ways became a victim himself of this system. He was found in a magazine with a label of Karate's Bad Boy. So what does that mean? Probably he's known to commit fouls or not always follow the rules. He's sort of a maverick, you would say. The first time we see Mike Barnes come in is in this negotiation scene. Terry Silver flies him in, and one of the things we see right away is that Mike Barnes is not of the wealthy. We can make this assumption because when he comes in, he's wide-eyed looking at Terry Silver's home, and he says, this place is intense. So he's really impressed by the wealth that he sees. So we can only assume that means Mike Barnes is probably from the working class. The second thing we see is that he's used to scrimping and saving each dime he has. So when he's brought in, the deal is that Terry Silver has bought 20 new dojos that are going to be ran by Sensei John Kreese. And he says, if you train and beat Daniel LaRusso in this tournament, I'm going to give you a 25% share in the dojos. And Mike, instead of accepting the 25%, which is probably a good amount of money, he negotiates for 50%. What does that tell us? Well, probably Mike Barnes is not, because he's not wealthy, he's seeing the dollar bills and thinking, this is a cash grab for me. I know that I can beat this guy, and so I am going to squeeze every last dime out of this setup. So only a person that really needs money is going to do something like that, because why wouldn't you just accept the 25% of 20 dojos, which is probably a lot of money? So he's feeling like he needs to squeeze this opportunity. The other thing you notice about this is that he was offered 25%. He counters with 50%, and then Terry Silver says, I think I can only offer you 35. And then Mike says, oh, thanks anyway. And he's going to walk out. And then Silver says, do you fight as hard as you negotiate? Well, Terry Silver rolled over pretty quickly. So it wasn't really a meeting of the minds. He sort of played Mike Barnes in that moment and made him feel like he had some level of power when, why does Terry care? He doesn't really need the money. So it makes Mike Barnes at that moment feel good, which was a pretty, almost like a chess move on Terry's part. That kind of gives us a hint too that Terry Silver is manipulating Mike Barnes from the beginning. Other thing to notice is in the contract, he is offered a weekly draw and a car. Now, probably the car it's not a gift. It's you can drive around one of the cars that I that is owned by me. Remember, they even, all of the people brought in all those cars for Terry Silver to drive that were supposed to make him look sort of more humble than he is. But the term weekly draw, what does that mean? So this is not a salary that Mike Barnes earns. It is a payment against his earnings from the tournament. So it's sort of like a loan against what he's going to make eventually. Terry Silver also says that he's going to have the contract in writing. And they end it by Mike saying, "You just bought yourself a champion." And then Terry Silver says, "You remember that." So even though it seems like Mike has the upper hand, as a matter of fact, Terry Silver has now contracted Mike to do work as a hired help for him. Other thing we can assume is that Mike Barnes ended Karate Kid 3 in debt. What do I mean by that? Well, think about it. He had this weekly draw that was cash against the earnings he was going to make from these 20 dojos that would open. They got it in writing. What do you think happened at the end of the movie? Most likely, he had gotten this weekly draw, which is cash against earnings, which he never made because he didn't win. The whole thing was contingent upon the fact that he win the tournament. The whole thing was, you need to come in, beat Daniel, then you get the 50% of the dojos. Since he did not beat Daniel and they didn't win, probably at the end of the day, he came out pretty screwed because the way, we don't know that for sure, but the way the contract was written, more than likely Mike ended up in debt. He was also banned from the All Valley tournament, which is a well-known tournament in California, karate tournament. Think about how many times when he's trying to get Daniel to sign this contract, he kept referring to his financial future. So he needed Daniel to sign the contract to help him ensure his future. Why was he so insistent? Yes, he could have just been a psychopath, but on the other hand, he also could have had a lot of pressure from Terry Silver to get Daniel to sign the contract and also to terrorize him and make him feel really threatened and intimidated. He had to put a lot of pressure on Daniel. Maybe he felt some pressure himself. So that's an interesting thing I think we're going to hear about later. The next thing we can kind of know is that Mike got more than he bargained for in the events of Karate Kid 3, because he was supposed to, the original deal was that he would train and beat Daniel. But that's not where things ended up, because Daniel kept wanting to get out. Miyagi wasn't going to train him, and then he decided himself, no, I don't want to do this after all. Mr. Miyagi was right. And so he had to keep going to his house and following him around, trying to get them to sign this contract. So probably, Mike seems to be a very driven young man, and he was trying to do the job he had been assigned to the best of his abilities, and it just got tougher and tougher. And he ends up getting, he has to endure a fake fight with Terry Silver, where Silver goes in, basically Mike Barnes goes into Mr. Miyagi's dojo and is assaulting Daniel because of them going, him being reported to jail. And then Terry Silver comes in and rescues Daniel from Mike Barnes and kind of acts like he's beating up on Mike. Now, even though that was staged, he was using force on Mike Barnes, and we all know Terry is pretty dominating and scary. So that might have actually been painful for him. Plus, we don't know what his training was like. We never see, even though Terry Silver says Dennis is going to handle your training, we later see the training montage and Kreese and Terry Silver are there yelling things. So we saw how Silver trained Daniel So who knows what kind of training Mike Barnes got. What does this all mean by what we might see from Mike Barnes in Cobra Kai season 5? There's always a possibility that he's not going to be a major character. Maybe he will be a cameo character, or we'll see him at the end of the series and he'll play a much larger role in season 6. It could be, so far we have seen one picture of Mike Barnes, which I'm going to show you right now. So we don't really know when this picture takes, what episode this picture is. There's always a chance that he'll just be brought in at the end, or it'll be played off as a humorous thing. People have talked about the clothes he's wearing. That is this a black silky gi? Is it a tuxedo? Is he a waiter at one of Terry's events? That's brought in and didn't know he was there. He wasn't expecting to see Terry. So give or take, it could just be a minor role, or something that's brought in at the very, very end, and mainly will operate in season 6. However, if he is going to be a major player in this episode, he could be either a villain or a good guy. So let's talk about both of those. So the more obvious thing would be for him to, just like Kreese brought in Silver to help him beat Daniel and Johnny, Kreese and Silver could decide, actually not Kreese, Kreese is in jail right now, but Silver could bring in Mike Barnes to help him now that the dojos are going to open, the chain of dojos. He feels some obligation to fulfill his promises to Mike, even though it's taken how many years? I don't know, 20 years or so. He's going to go ahead and offer Mike that share. Terry always keeps his promises. Who knows? I think that's the scenario we all sort of imagined, is that, he harassed and terrified Daniel once, he can do it again. So that's kind of where people are thinking that he's going to be recruited by Silver. One thing about the bad guy scenario, though, if they do bring him as a villain to work with Terry, it almost seems a little too obvious and a little too repetitive of what we've seen already. You brought in Kreese, went to see Silver. Silver at first said, "No, I don't think I want to do it," or "I'm mad at you, screw you." And then he ends up deciding, never mind, I'm going to do it. And, perhaps all along Silver knew he was going to twist the knife on Kreese. So it's, but almost, if they brought in Mike Barnes in that capacity, it would almost be too close to what they've done with what they did with Kreese and Silver, and it would just be kind of repetitive. And we're going to bring in another person to defeat them or to assure our victory. However, on the other side, you could bring in Mike Barnes as a surprise ally. How the big three love to do that. We've already had Chosen come in, and seeing Chosen might have been really scary, but it turned out he was this trickster, and he's gotten some clarity and been able to, he had guilt and shame, and he was able to turn around, and now he's, an ally of Daniel. It could be that because of Mike Barnes' feelings towards Silver, if he ended up feeling betrayed and having, feeling like he got the raw end of the deal when all he did was his work, and he gets screwed over, banned from karate tournaments, and maybe ends up owing Terry Silver a lot of money, then he could not like Silver and not come in because he wants to help Daniel, but because he wants to get revenge on him. The thing working against that, though, is do we really want Mike Barnes to come in and be a surprise friend to Daniel? I don't know. I mean, the show is so great at giving characters a roundedness, more complex. There's nobody's completely bad, completely good. But sometimes you do need people that are just, to some extent, you do need people that are just jerks. I mean, Kyler's a perfect example. I don't want a plot line to come up where I feel sorry for Kyler. I don't like Kyler. I still wish he'd get his comeuppance. Even now, he's still just a complete jerk. So maybe Mike Barnes doesn't need to have a fully fleshed out character, but if they're bringing him back, they're going to do something with him that gets his dimension turned up, because let's face it, he had, if Terry Silver's character was a caricature and ridiculous in Karate Kid 3, Mike Barnes was completely ridiculous. He had no backstory. He was just an angry, angry dude. So if they're bringing him back, we know they're going to give him some kind of arc. They're going to do something with his character. And these showrunners are great at giving surprises. So I fully expect it to be something we don't expect. It's not going to be what you expect to happen at all. So I don't know what it will look like, but I did want to review what happened in Karate Kid 3 to kind of think through with you what might be possible, or what plot points could they play upon. One more plot point that could be interesting, could turn into some kind of joke or not, but right before they get Daniel to sign the contract, they go to Mr. Miyagi's house and steal all of his bonsai trees. So what happened to the bonsai trees? Well, nobody knows what happened. There is a possibility that, they could have just taken them to the dump and thrown them out, but we know that Mike Barnes is strapped. So could he have opened a bonsai store with the stock that he stole? And maybe after he was able to pay off his debts with the profits from the bonsai sales. So that could be a joke they play on. But I do look forward to seeing what they're going to do with his character. I think maybe out of all of the people, when you look back at all of the villains in the Miyagi-verse, perhaps Mike Barnes is one of the most despicable. We all thought Terry Silver was crazy, but he was so fun to watch. He was like the good kind of crazy. I mean, sitting in a bubble bath with his huge cell phone and just laughing fiendishly with his ponytail. But Mike Barnes came across as a mean bully. He was the most racist out of all the people. He was mean and rude to Mr. Miyagi. He didn't seem to have any level except for 10. He just yelled all the time. So it'll be interesting to see what Sean Kanan does with him, because when you see Sean Kanan now doing interviews, he was a soap opera star. He's got all these different, he's different ways of speaking now, and his very smooth voice. So he's gonna have to work on having that one-dimensional Mike Barnes voice again, depending on what they do with his character. That is all for this episode of One of My Stories. Just wanted to talk through Mike Barnes with you. I hope you enjoy this, and I look forward to seeing Cobra Kai with you when it comes out. September 9th. I plan on that day after work, I plan on watching the whole thing, and I'll be doing a recap with a couple of colleagues. So look forward to that. I'll see you next time in one of my stories. Bye.